They're sitting next to you right now, in your office, in your family, in your friend group, maybe even in your bed. Narcissists. And they're using psychological tricks so sophisticated, so deeply rooted in the unconscious mind, that you don't even realize you're being controlled. Carl Jung spent decades studying the darkest aspects of human psychology. What he discovered about narcissistic manipulation would terrify most people, but it might save your sanity. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to expose the 7 psychological tricks that narcissists use to hijack your mind. These aren't obvious manipulation tactics. These are shadow techniques that operate beneath your conscious awareness. Jung called it psychological possession, the moment when someone else's personality begins to override your own, when their needs become more important than yours, when their reality becomes your reality. By the end of this video, you'll see the invisible prison they've built around your mind. And more importantly, you'll know exactly how to escape it. But I have to warn you, once you see these techniques, you can never unsee them. Your relationships will never look the same. Are you ready for that level of awareness? Carl Jung made a disturbing discovery while treating patients in his psychiatric practice. He realized that some people don't just have psychological problems, they are psychological problems for others. These individuals had learned to weaponize what Jung called the shadow, the dark, repressed aspects of personality that most people try to hide. But narcissists don't hide their shadow, they project it onto you. Jung observed that narcissists operate from what he called unconscious identification with the shadow archetype. They've become so merged with their dark impulses that they no longer recognize them as problematic. Instead, they see their manipulation as normal, their control as caring, their abuse as love. And this is what makes them so dangerous. They genuinely believe they're helping you when they're destroying you. Jung discovered that narcissists use 7 specific psychological techniques to control others. These techniques exploit fundamental aspects of human psychology: our need to belong, our desire to be loved, our fear of abandonment. But here's what Jung realized. These techniques only work because they target the victim's own shadow, the parts of themselves they're ashamed of or afraid to acknowledge. The narcissist becomes a mirror for your deepest insecurities. They reflect back everything you hate about yourself, then offer to fix it. But the price for their help is your psychological autonomy. Jung called this mutual shadow possession. You become possessed by their need to control, and they become possessed by your need to be controlled. Today we're going to break this spell. We're going to expose each technique, understand how it works, and learn how to immunize yourself against it. Let's begin with the most insidious technique of all. In the beginning, they seemed perfect for you. They liked everything you liked. They shared your values. They understood you in ways no one ever had. That wasn't love. That was shadow mirroring. And it's the first technique narcissists use to infiltrate your mind. Jung discovered that narcissists are master observers of human psychology. They study you with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. They catalog your desires, your fears, your insecurities, your dreams. Then they become the perfect person to fulfill all of it. But here's what Jung understood about this technique. The narcissist isn't actually becoming what you need. They're showing you a reflection of your own unconscious desires. They're activating what he called your anima, or animus, the idealized image of your perfect partner that lives in your unconscious mind. This is why the connection feels so intense, so immediate, so destined. You're not falling in love with them. You're falling in love with your own psychological projection. Jung observed that this mirroring serves a specific purpose. It creates what he called unconscious fusion. The boundaries between your identity and theirs begin to blur. You start to lose track of where you end and they begin. This is exactly what the narcissist wants. Because once the boundaries dissolve, control becomes invisible. The shadow mirroring technique works in stages. Stage 1 is study. They observe you carefully, noting your reactions, preferences, and emotional triggers. Stage 2 is mirroring. They begin reflecting back an idealized version of your desires and values. Stage 3 is fusion. You begin to feel an unnaturally strong connection, as if you found your other half. Stage 4 is dependency. You become emotionally dependent on this feeling of perfect understanding and compatibility. Stage 5 is control. Once you're dependent, they begin to withdraw the mirroring, leaving you desperate to get that feeling back. Jung called this archetypal entrapment. You become trapped not by who they are, but by who you think they are, which is actually a projection of your own unconscious. There are certain signs of shadow mirroring. The relationship feels too good to be true from the beginning. They seem to understand you better than you understand yourself. You feel like you've known them forever even though you just met. They agree with you on almost everything important. You start questioning relationships where there wasn't this level of compatibility. Remember, genuine compatibility develops over time through real interaction. Instant perfect compatibility is almost always artificial. But shadow mirroring is just the setup. Once they've established this psychological fusion, the second technique begins. After they've hooked you with perfect mirroring, something begins to change. You start feeling drained after spending time with them. Exhausted. Depleted. That's not coincidence. That's emotional vampirism. And Jung understood exactly how it works. Jung discovered that some individuals have what he called negative psychological energy. Instead of generating their own emotional sustenance, they feed off others. They're psychological parasites. Here's the mechanism. Narcissists lack what Jung called authentic selfhood. They have no genuine core identity. Instead, they exist as a kind of psychological black hole that needs constant feeding from external sources. Your attention, your energy, your emotional reactions, your validation. These become their food. And just like a physical parasite, they've evolved sophisticated methods to keep their host alive while slowly draining them. Jung observed that emotional vampires use specific techniques to extract energy. The first is crisis creation. They manufacture constant drama and emergencies that require your immediate attention and emotional investment. The second technique they use is emotional volatility. They create unpredictable mood swings that keep you walking on eggshells, constantly managing their emotional states. The third technique is victim playing. They position themselves as perpetually wounded, requiring your sympathy and caretaking. The fourth technique is rage farming. They provoke your anger and frustration, then feed off the intense emotional energy you produce. And here's what Jung found most disturbing about this technique. The victim often becomes addicted to the vampiric relationship, because when the narcissist feeds off your energy, they become temporarily more alive, more engaging, more present. This creates moments of intense connection that feel like love but are actually psychological consumption. You start chasing these moments of aliveness, not realizing that they come at the cost of your own vitality. There are some signs to recognize if you're being emotionally vampirized. You feel exhausted after spending time with them. You find yourself constantly managing their emotions. You feel responsible for their happiness and stability. You're always walking on eggshells around their moods. You feel more alive when they're happy, more dead when they're not. You start losing interest in activities and people you used to enjoy. Jung called this energetic entrainment. Your energy patterns become synchronized with theirs, but in a way that serves them while depleting you. The antidote is what Jung called psychological boundaries. Learning to separate your energy from theirs, your emotions from theirs, your responsibility from theirs. But emotional vampirism is just one way they drain you. The third technique is even more sinister. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're being too sensitive. I never said that. You're losing your mind. Jung called this psychological terrorism, the systematic destruction of your ability to trust your own perception of reality. But Jung's analysis goes deeper than simple gaslighting. He understood that narcissists are unconsciously trying to solve their own psychological problem by making it yours. Here's what Jung discovered. Narcissists have a fragmented relationship with reality. Their sense of self is so unstable that they can't tolerate any version of events that doesn't support their grandiose self-image. So they don't just lie to you. They lie to themselves so convincingly that they believe their own distortions. This is what makes them so effective at reality distortion. They're not consciously manipulating you. They're unconsciously forcing you to participate in their psychological defense system. Jung observed that reality distortion happens in predictable stages. Stage 1 is minor contradictions, small disputes about what was said or done, testing your willingness to doubt yourself. Stage 2 is gaslighting escalation, more significant contradictions of your memory and perception. Stage 3 is reality replacement. They begin substituting their version of events for yours in major situations. Stage 4 is sanity questioning. They suggest that your inability to accept their version means you're mentally unstable. Stage 5 is psychological dependence. You begin relying on their version of reality because you've lost confidence in your own. But here's Jung's crucial insight. Reality distortion only works because it targets your shadow doubt, the unconscious fear that maybe you are crazy, maybe you are wrong, maybe you can't trust yourself. The narcissist becomes the voice of that shadow doubt made external. Jung called this projection of the negative animus or anima. They project their own psychological instability onto you, then position themselves as the stable one who can help you make sense of reality. Now, what are the signs of reality distortion? You constantly question your own memory and perception. You find yourself apologizing for things you're not sure you did. You feel confused and disoriented after conversations with them. You rely on their interpretation of events even when it doesn't feel right. You start documenting interactions because you can't trust your memory. You feel like you're going crazy in this relationship. Jung's solution was what he called psychological anchoring, developing unshakable reference points for your own experience that can't be manipulated by others. This means trusting your initial reactions before they can be revised, writing things down, maintaining connections with people who validate your perceptions. But reality distortion is preparation for the fourth technique, which Jung considered the most dangerous of all. You're so selfish. You are manipulative. You're controlling. Now you're abusive. You are the narcissist. This is shadow projection. And according to Jung, it's the most psychologically devastating technique narcissists use. Jung discovered that narcissists have an unconscious defense mechanism that allows them to avoid confronting their own darkness. Instead of acknowledging their shadow qualities, they project them onto you. But this isn't just name-calling. This is sophisticated psychological warfare designed to make you believe that everything they're doing to you, you're actually doing to them. Jung understood that shadow projection serves multiple functions for the narcissist. It relieves their unconscious guilt by making you the problem. It confuses you by forcing you to defend against false accusations. It isolates you by making others see you as the difficult one. It gives them permission to escalate their abuse as self-defense. Here's how Jung observed shadow projection working. The narcissist unconsciously identifies with their idealized self-image and splits off everything that contradicts it. All their selfishness, manipulation, control, and cruelty get psychologically expelled. But these shadow qualities don't disappear. They get projected onto the nearest available target, usually their primary victim. Suddenly, you become the repository for everything they refuse to acknowledge about themselves. You become the monster in their story while they become the innocent victim. And because projection is an unconscious process, they genuinely believe their own accusations. They're not lying when they call you manipulative. They've literally transferred their own manipulativeness onto you in their psychological experience. This is what makes shadow projection so devastating. You're not just being accused of things you didn't do, you're being accused by someone who genuinely believes you did them. You might ask, what are the signs of shadow projection? These are the signs. They accuse you of exactly what they're doing to you. Their accusations seem to come out of nowhere and feel completely unfair. You find yourself defending against qualities you know you don't even have. Others start to see you as the problem in the relationship. You begin to question whether you might actually be the abusive one. You feel like you're in an upside-down world where victim and perpetrator are reversed. Jung called this mutual shadow possession. You become so focused on defending against their projections that you lose touch with your own authentic experience. The antidote to shadow projection is what Jung called shadow integration. Owning your actual flaws while refusing to carry theirs. But shadow projection creates the perfect setup for the fifth technique, which Jung observed in his most disturbed patients. They hurt you, then comfort you. They tear you down, then build you up. They reject you, then love bomb you back. This isn't inconsistency. This is trauma bonding. And Jung understood it as one of the most powerful control mechanisms in human psychology. Jung discovered that human beings form the strongest attachments not through consistent kindness, but through intermittent reinforcement of pain and relief from the same source. Here's the psychological mechanism Jung identified. When someone causes you pain and then provides relief from that pain, your unconscious mind becomes confused about the source of both experiences. Your brain starts to associate the person who hurt you with the person who saved you, because they're the same person. Jung called this archetypal confusion. The narcissist simultaneously activates your persecutor archetype and your rescuer archetype, creating psychological chaos that your mind tries to resolve through attachment. The trauma bonding process follows a predictable cycle that Jung observed repeatedly. Phase 1 is tension building. You sense something is wrong. The narcissist becomes cold, distant, irritable. You walk on eggshells. Phase 2 is explosive incident. The narcissist releases their psychological pressure through verbal, emotional, or physical abuse. Phase 3 is reconciliation. They apologize, show remorse, promise it will never happen again. They're loving and attentive. Phase 4 is calm period. Things seem normal, even good. You feel hopeful that the relationship has improved. Then the cycle repeats, usually with increasing intensity. But here's what Jung found most disturbing. Each cycle strengthens the bond. Your brain releases stress chemicals during the tension and abuse phases, then relief chemicals during the reconciliation and calm phases. You become literally addicted to this neurochemical cycle. The trauma bond becomes stronger than healthy love because it's more neurochemically intense. The relief after pain feels more powerful than simple pleasure. The comfort after cruelty feels like salvation. These are the signs of trauma bonding. You feel like you can't leave despite being consistently mistreated. You make excuses for their behavior and defend them to others. You feel grateful for basic human decency from them. You believe you're the only one who truly understands them. You feel responsible for fixing or helping them. You experience withdrawal-like symptoms when you're apart from them. You feel more attached after episodes of abuse than after kind treatment. Jung understood that trauma bonding hijacks your natural attachment system. Your brain becomes convinced that this person is essential for your survival, even though they're actually threatening it. Breaking trauma bonding requires what Jung called conscious suffering, deliberately staying with the discomfort of separation until your brain can form new, healthier attachment patterns. But trauma bonding keeps you trapped while the sixth technique slowly destroys your sense of self. Who were you before you met them? Can you remember? The person you used to be with your own opinions, preferences, dreams, and boundaries. If that person feels like a distant memory, you've experienced what Jung called psychological dissolution, the gradual erosion of your authentic identity. Jung discovered that narcissists unconsciously seek to merge others with their own psychological system. Not out of love, but out of a desperate need to expand their fragmented sense of self. But they can't merge with a strong, individuated person. So first, they must dissolve your individual identity. Jung observed that identity erosion happens through what he called systematic invalidation, the consistent undermining of everything that makes you uniquely you. Your thoughts are wrong, your feelings are excessive, your preferences are strange, your boundaries are unreasonable, your dreams are impractical. This invalidation targets what Jung called your individuation process, your natural development toward becoming a complete autonomous person. The narcissist interrupts this process by making you doubt the validity of your emerging authentic self. Jung identified the stages of identity erosion. Stage 1 is preference suppression. You stop expressing preferences that differ from theirs to avoid conflict. Stage 2 is opinion modification. You begin adopting their viewpoints to maintain harmony. Stage 3 is emotional regulation. You learn to manage your emotions around their comfort level. Stage 4 is value alignment. Your core values begin shifting to match theirs. Stage 5 is complete absorption. You lose track of where you end and they begin. Jung called the final stage psychological possession. You become a psychological extension of the narcissist rather than an independent person. Here are the signs of identity erosion. You can't make decisions without their input or approval. You've lost touch with activities and interests you used to enjoy. You don't recognize the person you've become in this relationship. You feel empty or lost when you're alone. You automatically consider their needs before your own. You've isolated from people who knew you before the relationship. You feel like you don't know who you are anymore. Jung understood that identity erosion is perhaps the most damaging form of psychological abuse because it attacks the foundation of your psychological existence. Without a clear sense of self, you can't set boundaries, make healthy decisions, or form authentic relationships. Recovery requires what Jung called active individuation, the conscious process of rediscovering and reclaiming your authentic identity. But identity erosion sets up the final technique, which Jung considered the narcissist's ultimate weapon. You want to leave. You know you should leave. But somehow you can't. Something invisible is holding you in place, making escape feel impossible. That's not weakness, that's psychological imprisonment. And Jung understood it as the culmination of all previous techniques. Jung discovered that narcissists don't need physical chains to imprison someone. They create what he called psychological cages. Invisible barriers constructed from fear, guilt, shame, and dependency. By the time you realize you need to escape, they've already made escape psychologically impossible through systematic conditioning. Jung identified the components of psychological imprisonment. Fear barriers. You're afraid of what they'll do if you leave. Afraid of their rage, their revenge, their ability to destroy your reputation or relationships. Guilt chains. You feel responsible for their well-being. You believe leaving them would be cruel, selfish, or morally wrong. Shame locks. You're ashamed of how long you've tolerated the abuse, ashamed that you fell for their manipulation, ashamed to admit the relationship was a lie. Dependency walls. They've made you financially, emotionally, or socially dependent on them. Leaving feels like jumping into an abyss. But Jung understood that psychological imprisonment also involves what he called trauma-induced learned helplessness. After repeated failed attempts to change the relationship, your unconscious mind concludes that escape is impossible. You stop trying because your brain has been conditioned to believe that resistance is futile. The psychological prison is maintained through several mechanisms. The first mechanism is intermittent reinforcement. Just when you're ready to leave, they provide just enough improvement to make you stay. The second is sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much time and energy that leaving feels like admitting it was all wasted. The third is isolation maintenance. They've systematically damaged your relationships with potential support systems. The fourth mechanism is reality distortion. You no longer trust your own judgment about whether the relationship is actually abusive. And the last is identity fusion. You can't imagine who you would be without them. Jung observed that victims often become complicit in their own imprisonment. They start making excuses for staying, rationalizing the abuse, and sabotaging their own escape attempts. Now one might ask, what are the signs of psychological imprisonment? You want to leave but feel paralyzed when you try. You make plans to escape but never follow through. You feel like you can't survive without them. You're more afraid of leaving than of staying. You believe you deserve the treatment you're receiving. You feel responsible for their mental health and stability. You can't imagine a life outside this relationship. Jung called this state psychological Stockholm syndrome, identifying with your captor as a survival strategy. But Jung also discovered that psychological imprisonment can be broken. It requires what he called conscious rebellion, the deliberate choice to act against your conditioned fears and dependencies. The key is understanding that the prison exists primarily in your mind. The moment you recognize the cage, you begin to see the door. Which brings us to Jung's solution for breaking free from narcissistic control entirely. Jung didn't just identify how narcissists control minds. He developed a protocol for breaking free from their psychological domination. He called it conscious individuation, the process of reclaiming your authentic self from psychological possession. Jung's liberation protocol involves 7 stages that directly counter the 7 techniques of narcissistic control. Stage 1. Shadow recognition. Acknowledge that you've been under psychological influence. Stop denying, minimizing, or rationalizing the manipulation you've experienced. Stage 2. Energy reclamation. Begin withdrawing your emotional energy from the narcissist. Stop trying to manage their moods, solve their problems, or earn their approval. Stage 3. Reality anchoring. Trust your own perceptions and experiences, document interactions, seek external validation from trusted sources. Stage 4. Shadow integration. Own your actual flaws without carrying theirs. Refuse to accept projections that don't belong to you. Stage 5. Trauma processing. Break the addictive cycle by going no contact or implementing strict boundaries. Allow yourself to experience withdrawal without returning to the source. Stage 6. Identity reconstruction. Reconnect with who you were before the relationship. Rediscover your preferences, values, and dreams independent of their influence. Stage 7. Psychological freedom. Develop what Jung called psychological immunity, the ability to recognize and resist manipulation attempts automatically. Jung understood that liberation from narcissistic control isn't just about leaving the relationship. It's about becoming the type of person who can never be controlled again. This requires developing what he called individuated consciousness, complete psychological independence where your sense of worth, reality, and identity come from within rather than from others. When you achieve this state, narcissists lose all power over you. You can see their techniques clearly. You're immune to their manipulation. You're free. But Jung warned that this process requires courage. It means facing your own shadow, the parts of yourself that made you vulnerable to control in the first place. It means taking responsibility for your own psychological healing and development. It means becoming conscious in a world where most people prefer to remain unconscious. This is the price of freedom. And according to Jung, it's worth paying. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissists in your life aren't your fate. They're your teachers. They're showing you exactly what parts of your psyche need to be healed, strengthened, and integrated. Every manipulation technique they used revealed a vulnerability in your psychological armor. Every moment of control showed you where you need to develop independence. Every act of abuse highlighted where you need to build boundaries. They're everywhere, in your workplace, your family, your social circles. But now you can see them. Now you understand their techniques. Now you know how to protect yourself. Jung's gift to humanity was the understanding that we don't have to remain victims of psychological manipulation. We can become conscious. We can individuate. We can be free. The 7 techniques of narcissistic control only work on unconscious minds. When you become conscious, you become invulnerable. That's Jung's promise. Consciousness is liberation. Awareness is freedom. Understanding is power. Use this knowledge wisely. Your psychological freedom depends on it. So, which technique made you realize you're dealing with a narcissist? And if you've already broken free from a narcissist, share in the comments one thing that gave you the strength to walk away. If this resonated with you, you know what to do. And if you're ready to dive deeper into the psychology of power and influence, I'll see you in the next video.